My father named me William Chatterton Dix, after his favorite poet, Thomas Chatterton, shortly after my birth in Bristol, England in 1837. My father was a surgeon by occupation, but literature was his true passion. He loved the written word and exposed all of us children to poetry and literature from a very young age. He instilled in me a love for the English language that would stay with me for my entire life. As most families in Bristol in the mid-1800s, our family attended church, but it really didn't mean anything to me. It was a very staunch and stale church. There was a lot of rules, but not a lot of passion. Not the type of passion I saw in my father for poetry. The church was afraid that passion would lead to sin and paganism. They forbade most forms of poetry and songs because they were afraid that they would distract from the true focus of Christ. Now I hear that that is not so in America, that you have taken quite liberty, shall we say, in setting things to music. Only in America, I says, but I digress. Well, when I had completed my schooling, I decided to move to Glasgow, Scotland, and go into business. I began working for a marine insurance company and quickly rose to success. Though I still had a passion for poetry, making money had now become my primary focus. But at the age of 29, the perfect life that I had carved out for myself suddenly came crashing down around me. I became extremely ill and bedridden. The doctors were not entirely sure what ailment I suffered from, but were sure it was fatal and would eventually claim my life. I spent all of my money trying to find a cure, but none could be found. After several months of fighting the illness, I began to lose hope that I would ever be whole again. With my fortunes gone, my physical illness was soon joined by mental illness. I fell into a deep depression and began to think and act irrationally. The doctors told my family that this was the end of my life. They said that once a person gives up hope and the will to live, it usually doesn't take very long for the body to follow. As my family, now impoverished by my long battle with this illness, began preparing for my death, a miracle happened. God reached down from heaven and grabbed my heart in a new and real way that I had never experienced before. I had only known an emotionless God of rules and regulations that hated passion and poetry. But suddenly, I was standing face to face with a God who loved me, was passionate about me, and wanted to have a relationship with me. My heart was filled with hope, and for the first time I realized that God had created poetry and art. I began to write as I had never written before. Poem after poem poured forth from my soul, praising God for who He was and what He had done for me and how He had saved me. Now, I was still very ill, and the doctors were still convinced that I would not live much longer. But that didn't matter now. I had met God and knew that as long as He allowed me to stay on this earth, I would write poetry praising Him, and that when He chose to end my life here on earth, that I would be with Him praising him forevermore in heaven. Well, a few more months passed, and I didn't die. In fact, I began to get stronger and eventually was able to get out of bed. And in a few more months, I was strong enough to return to work. But I returned with a completely different focus. The money was not important anymore. All that I cared about was praising God through poetry. Well, some time passed, and my family encouraged me to put my poetry to music. Well, not being very musically inclined, I chose existing folk tunes and began fitting my poetry to them. One such poem was called "The Manger Throne," which I coupled with the traditional British melody known as Greensleeves. And the song, "What Child Is This?" was born.